welcome back to the channel. I hope that you're all doing well and that you're enjoying your summer, last weeks of summer. I have a fun recipe for you today. You know, I love cooking foods from various cuisines, and today I have a pupusa. I love my local El Salvadorian pupuserie. I think that's what they're called, or pupusa, or El Salvadorian restaurant, and they make delicious pupusas. And I had the guts enough one day to go buy a bag of masa and try it, and I want to take you along for this journey. So my first time making them, they turned out great. I think with a little practice I'll get even better, but let me show you how I did it. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is serve this Salvadorian pickled slaw. So Salvadorian pickled slaw, or currito I believe it's called, is served on the side whenever you order pupusas, and it's a cooling salad that you can eat alongside your pupusas. It's very delicious. So the first thing I'm going to do is, of course, dice my cabbage, and I'm going to go ahead and tenderize it here. It just makes for a crunchier, I think, salad. So I love to do that. You don't have to tenderize yours, but of course a slaw sometimes has that texture, you know. So I'm adding cucumber, also jicama. So jicama is one of my favorite things to add to something like a coleslaw, because it just gives you extra nutrients and vegetables, and it kind of takes on the flavor profile of whatever it is you're making. So here in my little baggie from my leftover tacos recently, I have cilantro and onion that I'll be adding to this slaw. And so it's about 1/4 of a head of cabbage, a half a cucumber, and also the onions and jicama and cilantro. I'm using this Badia all-purpose seasoning. You could use whatever seasoning you want. I picked this one up recently, and it worked really well in this recipe. It is kind of overpowering for your everyday chicken kind of recipes, but in something like this, it works really well. So I'm adding a tablespoon of white vinegar, 1/4 of a cup of apple juice, and salt and pepper as well. Now, if you have apple cider vinegar, of course, you could just use that instead of the addition of the applesauce, but I didn't, so kind of making my own. We're going to sit that in the fridge and let it get really cool. Now, for our salsa, we're going to add 1 tomato, a little bit of onion, and seeded jalapeno to a pot, and we're going to get it simmering. And so we're going to simmer that for about 10 minutes or so and add it to our food processor, and we're going to give this a blend. So we're not fully cooking those vegetables, we're just kind of blanching them to make it easier to puree. So once we puree our salsa, we're going to add a little bit of tomato paste and about a teaspoon of vegetable oil to my simmer pot here. And we're going to go ahead, get that tomato paste kind of cooked in with that oil. It's just going to give our salsa a richer depth. And we're going to go ahead and add that pureed salsa directly into this pot and let it cook. And you know, we are just kind of bringing out the flavors, the depth of that tomato, onion, and jalapeno. So we'll let it go for maybe 12 minutes or so. We don't want to scorch it or overcook it or anything like that. We're really just kind of letting it simmer so the flavors come together. And then what we're going to do is, once this cooks, we're going to add it to a jar. And this sits in your fridge for about a month. So I'm using the Badia all-purpose seasoning again, a little bit of salt and pepper, and just kind of extending that flavor profile that I used earlier. So here we go, adding it to somewhat of a mason jar. I'm going to store that in the fridge. Okay, for the main ingredients for our pupusas, of course, we're going to need some masa. I'm using the Oaxacan cheese because it's a queso cheese. It's queso, well, cheese is queso, but it's such a great melting cheese. And then we're also going to use these pork rinds and these refried black beans. So let's get going. Now, pork rinds or chicharron are really, really tough. You know, they're hard to eat sometimes. And, you know, I think that I don't want such a crunchy element in my pupusas. So what I'm going to do is cook it down a little bit. The flavor of the chicharron in the pupusas is so good. So I'm going to add my chicharron to a little bit of boiling water and let them get soft, but I am going to kind of crisp them up again. So this is my method. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but it worked out pretty well. All right, for our pupusas, we're going to use 3 cups of the masa and 2.5 cups of warm water. So what you want to do is kind of play with your masa and water levels to make sure that you get the right consistency. And what you're looking for is a non-sticky consistency. So what you see me doing here is mixing it, and once I'm able to form a ball in my hand without any residue or any stickiness, watch this. So you see it's not sticking to my hands, then you know we're ready to go. All right, so that's the masa. We got that going. And what we're going to do is just set it aside for a moment, and then we're going to form our patties and add these ingredients into, of course, the masa. So my chicharron have gotten pretty soft. I'm going to go ahead and add them to my skillet here with that a little bit of oil, maybe a teaspoon or so. I know this seems kind of backwards, but I want a little crisp, just not as much as, of course, it comes straight out of the bag, you know. I'm going to add a little taco seasoning to my chicharron or pork rinds, and I'm going to try to get a crunchy bottom, you know, so make them go flat against the heat. They'll crisp up a little on you. All right, for our cheese, we're going to shred that Oaxacan cheese. I love this Oaxacan cheese. You know, it's basically mozzarella. It's like a Mexican mozzarella cheese. But again, it does melt very well. So we're going to add about 1.5 cups of that Oaxacan cheese. Get those chicharrones out of the skillet, and you can see that they've somewhat crisped up on us. Taking our refried black beans out of the bag, we're going to mix in about 1/2 cup of cheese. You could certainly add more or less depending on what you want, and give that a stir. This is the filling for our pupusas. So I love these refried black beans. They're so flavorful, and of course black beans are really good for you. So we're going to mix that in with the cheese, and we're going to do the same thing with our chicharron. So we're going to add a few of the crispies because, you know, why not? Texture is a good thing when you're cooking, right? A little bit of texture is not going to hurt us, but certainly we don't want the whole bowl filled with those hard, crunchy chicharron. All right, so I'm going to add my cheese to these chicharrones and give them a stir. Now I've added some cooking spray to my hands, and let's go ahead and get going on these pupusas. So this is my first time making these, and so of course I'm no pro. I'm sure I'll get better as we go. But what we're going to do is take a handful of that masa and spread it across your hand and add your filling to the center of that masa, and then we're just going to grab it from the ends of my fingers and wrap it into somewhat of a ball. You see that? Just pulling it up, getting that masa to cover our filling, scooping it down in there so that I can get a good top twist, because what you're going to do is like a dumpling almost, you know. There you go. Move it around in your hands, get it encompassed, that masa encompassed around your filling, bring it up, pat it back down. You see that? Now, you can tell that I'm an amateur because the beans are somewhat showing, but that's all right. We'll keep going. So again, you want to add enough masa to your hand to kind of spread it out to be able to wrap it up. And this masa is so pliable, it's easier to work with than you think. And so here, of course, I have the pork and the cheese filling, and I'm just kind of using that same method, rolling it around in my hands until I create a ball, pinching it at the top to get any excess, and then just creating my patties. Looks good. Now, one of them did fall apart as I was cooking, but we're not going to talk about that. Again, you know, first timer here, I'll get better. I'm going to use my griddle on my stove. Added some cooking oil, got it nice and hot, and we're going to let them go. And they cooked for about 10 minutes or so on each side, because you know, you want to make sure your masa is ready and it's cooked through, and they are looking really good. So here are my refried beans, and you can see that cheese coming out of there. Oh my gosh. You know, I love pupusas, and although again I'm not a pro, this was very close to what I walk into a restaurant and purchase. And they were so good and something different, you know. The masa was, I guess, about $5 for the bag, and it lasts for so long, you know. So, I mean, you can make these pupusas time and time again. So here's my Salvadorian slaw that we've let sit in the fridge for a bit. I made a little bit of Spanish rice in my rice cooker as a side dish. And of course, you can't forget that delicious salsa that you see often in the Salvadorian or pupusa restaurants. And it's such a wonderful little salsa to dip your pupusas in. Look at that. You know, just a little prep work, trial and error, and you have something new that you could offer your family for dinner. Really great. The chicharron and the refried beans were so good, but of course you could do chicken, you can do all kinds of other protein. Squash and cheese would be really good too. Now, this was too hot for me to handle, but I couldn't wait. I had to see if there was a cheese pool, and I got one. So, lovely, lovely recipe. You know, whenever I can learn a new culture or new food recipe, I want to do it, and pupusas are certainly one of my favorites. I hope you give it a try. Well, what did you guys think about that pupusa recipe? Do you think you might give it a shot? I hope that you do. And, you know, you could do chicken, a little bit of beef. You could do all kinds of things. But today I tried to do something that I see a lot at the El Salvadorian restaurant. And so I did the beans and the cheese, and then, of course, those pork cracklings. All right, well, let me know if you give it a try and what you thought of today's recipe. And guess what? I will see you on the next video. Take care, guys. Bye.